highly publicized that was, and as much money they put in that race, Mr. Munchkin, it was low voter turnout. And so I just want this committee to be responsible. While you're saying out of your mouth that we need to improve voter turnout, we're not saying the system. Come on, Mr. Burrow. I'm trying to get along with you.
Any other members of the public want to speak on this item?
The system?
Okay.
These are people.
2022 primary turnout, I'm reading off of the sheet that I have here. Black turnout was 40.7%, Hispanic turnout was 34.19%, white turnout was 55.9%. 2022 general election, black turnout was 60.2%, Hispanic turnout was 60.7%, white turnout 73.6%. So when we're talking about more voter participation, it has nothing to do with race, it has nothing to do with party. I know that some of the rhetoric around the work that the committee has done has been dragged into partisanship. We're talking about nonpartisan elections. I'm not talking about the Leon Dems, I'm not talking about the Leon Republicans. They're irrelevant in this conversation. And so, again, I will reiterate, for me, this is about greater participation in our local elections. And so, for me, that's where I'm at, and my vote hasn't changed.
Any further discussion on this one? If not, we're going to go on to function 4. Anything else on function 3?
Save it for the next
Okay. All right, function 4, periodic charter review requirement. Any additional information anybody on the committee would like from staff on this topic? Any discussion on this topic from the committee?
I think we made good progress in the last meeting on this. I didn't know where we were leaning, 8 years, 6 years. And again, my position was to have some sort of periodic charter review no matter what. But I would love to hear more opinions on this particular topic, because if we narrow down to a structure before the next meeting, it will be very beneficial. I think previous meeting was mainly we discussed 8 years, 6 years. So I'm really not sure exactly where we landed. So I would love to hear more.
Other discussion on the committee? Mr. Payne.
I too think that we made a lot of progress last week. I think it made a lot of sense that if we schedule our charter review to offset the county charter review, which is on an 8-week program, that would mean if we said the next charter review is in 8 weeks, 8 years, it would be at the same time as the next county charter. So if we were going to offset that, that would mean the next charter review would be either 6 years or 10 years, and I would vote for 6 years because, as I said last time, there are a number of issues that we just won't have a chance to address this time. So they'll still be hanging out there. If we schedule it right, like I was saying last time, and begin the process early in the year prior to the election, then we might have a chance to have an actual full charter review where we can go section by section to see whether or not we want to adjust things. So that would be my opinion, to start actually 5 years from now to get it on the ballot, 6 years from now, and then every 8 years after that.
Okay. Other discussion on this item? Yes.
I'll just say I agree with that concept. I do believe that 8 to 10 years is too long for a complete review of the charter. So whatever we decide in terms of interval, we should set a time, even if it's before that, that recommends a full review of the charter within a reasonable amount.
Okay. Mr. Demmer.
I agree with both. And just to add on that point, if you could have these years work on an odd year, I think we discussed having more time, maybe larger review period, 90 days, 120 days, if we were to have it on an odd year. So I'm not sure how these years work. 6 years from now sounds great. And then 8 years from that point on sounds good. But 6 years from now is 2030. So I don't know if we should do 5 years from now and then 8 years after that to have it on an odd year, or 7 years from now. I'm not sure, but I think we should have the review on an odd year.
One thing just to, and I tend to agree with both of you. The one thing to think about is sort of the time period during which the discussion would take place. And I agree that this is, this is a very truncated period. This isn't optimal. There needs to be a larger time period. But if you back it up too far, then, I mean, the election is in November of the following year. I mean, you're, potentially a year out. A lot of stuff happens in a year. I mean, I think you want to have it a little closer to the actual vote, but longer than this. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on it. Others may have other thoughts, but
Yeah,
Ms. Bryant.
Probably more of a question. So what is the difficulty with the odd year?
No, odd year will give us more time, because the election will be the year after, to discuss and get the topics out to the public and get more public input, potentially have a little bit more opinion about what the charter should look like, not just 60 days, 90, 120 days, or maybe giving commission more time.
I thought we were doing 1 year review within 60 days. I'm confused.
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the discussion, but I mean, a year, if you back up a year from, assuming that this is correct, that we sort of need to have it done by March or April so it could get on the ballot, then you're starting March or April a year would be the year prior, yes.
Which then, yeah.
Mr. Payne?
Just to remind everybody, this process was actually started in June of the odd year. And it took 6 months or more to have our first meeting. So keep that in mind. If we start earlier in the odd year, have a period where take more time to decide upon the scope, that the city commission can decide on the scope, and especially take more time to get citizen input to determine what people want to see. And then arrange it so that before the summer, because the city commission goes on a break every summer, I think June or July or whatever it is. If the committee can be chosen before that time, the city could meet through the summer period, after they've had the time for the public input. And basically have as much time as we need to do an actual full charter review every 8 years.
So I'm sure that Ms. James and Ms. Tillman find that, want to advise my client here. It's 40 years of being a lawyer. I can't help it. So, but I guess probably, and I think we're all probably not too far apart on that. But just in terms of of giving a recommendation to the city, within the things that you just mentioned, let's think about what do we want to say. Is it, when do you start the process? Is it how long the committee has to deliberate, which is maybe those are, two separate things, I don't know. But the second one is really, you start the process whenever you want, but this committee needs X period of time to sort of make their discussions, if that makes sense. Ms. James?
I would, based upon what Mr. Payne said, just say that the date is January of the odd year. If June of the odd year didn't give us enough time, we just push it back to January of the odd year and not be prescriptive as to what happens in that time period. I think that's where the language gets a little difficult, and there's a lot to tie people into perpetuity. But if we say January of the odd year, that gives us about 5 or 6 more months worth of runway.
So you're saying January, the idea to start the process of the charter review committee?
That, either that or say that the charter review committee is convened. We could either go back a little bit, if we say it in a way that the committee meets or is convened in January versus the commissioners appoint in January. I'm just saying, give it a date or a month certain to be a starting point versus
For the committee convening,
for the committee convening.
okay.
The other thing I would say is that as we get closer to some options, I think it would be helpful if staff could draft a recommendation for us to consider on the 20th. And
Particularly on this one, that might be a good idea. The one thing, again, I would just throw out there, so if the committee actually convenes in January, as much as I love this, doing it all year long would not be really what I would want to do. So, so that's why I was saying, I mean, you can back up so far that, you're done in 6 months in July, and now we're, over a year till the election. So I don't know that, again, if there's a happy median, or you just take that chance and figure it'll take them 6 months to get the thing. I mean, if it's actually, it has to be convened in January, you'd have to form it and pick it, the year before. So 2 years out.
Yeah, I don't think anybody was talking about convening a committee in January. I'm saying start the planning process, start the
Okay.
collecting of public input, so that maybe by June, we're ready to start the committee. I don't think we should put any kind of hard code into the charter as to how long the proceedings of the committee should be run, because it's gonna vary based on the scope of the charter at that particular time. So there needs to be more flexibility there, so that shouldn't be coded into the charter.
Mr. Dillon?
I think the reason why it took 6 months this time is because the charter does not specify a process for the review. I think it was brought up by Commissioner Williams-Cox, and then that was 1 month, right? The 30 days later, staff brought an agenda item, and that's 1 month there. And then month after that, I think they approved potential bylaws, and please correct me if I'm wrong. And then a month later, they appointed all of us, and eventually after that. So if there is actually a process in the charter saying that the next charter review is, let's say, 2029, and the process starts, let's say, Q2, April 1st of 2029, and that April commission meeting could potentially be the meeting where the commissioners could appoint, or I don't know what the process is called, but start appointing their members to the charter committee, because it's already designed. Staff don't need to bring another agenda item back unless, if it's already in the charter, then we know 2029, that meeting, they're going to appoint. Potential reminder prior to that meeting. I guess the timeline, the point that I'm trying to make first, the timeline is shorter if we insert a clause in our charter that this is the next process. And from that point on, I guess the next meeting, they can just start appointing. The month after, we can start convening, and that will be May of 2029. And then from that 8 years on, I don't know if that will make sense.
Just one
Ms.
point.
Bryant?
The only thing we probably need in the charter itself is the specific time when we begin. Now, whatever they have to do before they get to that becomes a process within the commission. We don't need to prescribe that. Bottom line, they know on ABC date, it starts. Period.
No, I mean,
They have to
I
do
would,
it all at one time.
I tend to agree, because otherwise, if you're just gonna start the process a year earlier, well, they could, take, 9 months to do the process. So yes, I would think if you wanna do that, when's this committee convene. And I would suggest you might maybe think a minimum of 6 months or something like that, and then you could do it longer if they wanted to. But I think, to really have a, any more, deliberate discussion than we're having, probably need about that. I mean, but others may feel differently. Ms. James?
I'd like just saying when it's convened and then let the process determine the length of time. Because it could be that in, 20 or whatever year, there's not a whole lot of discussion, or there's not a lot of, sentiment in the city or the community to make significant changes. So I would my preference is to leave that open so that the people at the time can make that determination.
What date would you suggest?
If we're coming up with a convene date, meaning that everything had to have been
Right.
kind of I think June is fine,
Yeah, I'd agree.
yeah.
So, all right, well, sorry to have the free-form discussion, but it sort of seems to help on something like this. So other discussion on this item? Okay. Members of the public, anybody want to speak? Yes, sir.
Taylor Norris Barber, 527 West Broad Street.
Mr. Payne, you mentioned a full charter review. There's nothing that prohibits you from doing a full charter review right now. Function 2 is really the motivation behind this charter review. And there was a great deal of discussion about compensation and how, I'm talking about among city commissioners and from the dais, about how they could accomplish function 2 without a charter review, because they definitely did not want to open this charter up for review. So they got to a point where they decided, well, maybe we can limit the scope. And so they pulled out these 4 things, but they can't. And it's not fair to the citizens either for them to limit the charter review, the scope of the charter review. Ms. Fritz mentioned doing away with the leadership mayor and going back to a rotating mayor. Hell, I'd like to see term limits. And I think both of those things should be considered right now while you're going through this review. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public like to speak on this item?
Talk about
Anybody online want to speak on this item? Okay, any other discussion by the committee on this one? If not, we will move to function, yes.
Staff given an assignment there?
Well, yeah, I guess, based on this discussion, that maybe you guys would craft a motion along that line that for the committee to consider at the next meeting.
Okay, just making
Okay.
sure that's,
Any questions on your part about sort of what was talked about?
I think we're good. I think probably what we'll do is we'll bring something back and may have a couple of maybe items in italics or underlined where those are the variables, but that hopefully it hits what you've asked for. But if there's something you need to change, rather than have to write the whole thing, you can just say, take that piece and move it 60 days or whatever.
Okay, all right. Any objection on that? If not, let's go to function number 1, number of electors. Any additional information that any member of the committee would like on this item? Okay. Any discussion, the committee, on function number 1, number of electors? Yep, Mr. Banks.
I would just like to point out that tabulating all the survey results from the online surveys from starting back in October, I guess, through today. 52% of the respondents prefer that the commission stays at 5.
Other discussion on this item? Hang on just a second, Mr. Sims. Any other committee discussion? Okay. If not, Mr. Sims, go right ahead.
Mr. Munchkin, it's apparent to me we're gonna stay at 5. But what I have not heard from
in dialogue is how to make these 5 respectable and operation productive. And I believe that goes into the ordinance. And the ordinance will direct that our city commissioners will operate under Robert Rules and Order. That in that ordinance, it also will clarify how meetings can be set, and we use as an example the county. Often what causes a lot of friction is our pet peeve projects. And so there's a rule at the county, you have to have unanimous. So these little mechanisms in place with Robert Rules of Order, it doesn't eliminate the fray, but it moves the meetings and cut down a lot of things. And I just asking, I don't know where, Mr. Munchkin, I'm not a lawyer, I've just hired one. I don't know where in that ordinance that you all could find some guidance to give to the commissioners to have a more productive and orderly meeting. But I think that I would love to hear from you all of some kind of recommendations that we can keep a productive, and that when there is a distinction, there is something that a rule that can go to. I just never heard anything about, we haven't discussed any about the ordinance. Is that a tool that we could use?
Other members of the public like to speak on this item? Yes, sir.
Kayla Norris Barber, 527 West Brevard Street. I just want to mention the survey that Mr. Payne mentioned. I have not seen the survey. Don't know where the survey is. And it just galls me that, especially for elected officials, and I'm going to speak on from a black perspective, especially when they want to educate the public, black public, they always fall short. But when they're running, when they want to get their message out and they want to get elected or re-elected, they know exactly what to do. They go to the black church. Hands down. They all do it. They know that's what works. Am I right? Yes, I'm right. So now, when it comes to something like this, they stick it in a little corner newspaper, in a website, on a website, and don't really tell the folks it's there. I don't know. I never heard about it. Didn't know the survey was there. So they did a piss poor job of getting the survey out. And the survey results, I think, are skewed.
Other members of the public like to speak on this item? Anybody online like to speak? This is function number 1 on the number of electors, number of members of the city commission. All right. Any other discussion on the committee? Mr. Willis?
I just want to actually tack off of something that Mr. Barber said. So I'm looking at this map, and I hope that the members of the public get an opportunity to see this as well. When you see the shading, you can have my copy. When you see the shading on the map, it shows the turnout percentage, and those of us that are from Tallahassee can look at these precincts with low turnout, and we know where they are. And to Mr. Barber's point, you do need to go through the black churches and go through the black community to get elected. I think we're coming to a point where you're not going to need to do that anymore. And so I'm going to reiterate my point from last week. I think we're missing the boat by having a discussion around the number of electors without talking about whether the system that we have set up properly provides representation for every portion of the city. And again, this is no referendum on our current commission. I will take for the sake of argument that we have a perfect representation. I think people would dispute that, but just for the sake of argument, I'm talking about 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And so I just, again, I want to reiterate my point. I feel like just talking about the number is missing some things here. And I think this map tells a great story, so.
Okay. Other discussion on this item? Mr. Payne?
I'd like to tack on what's been said of our two speakers, Mr. Barber, just for you you and for anybody else that's listening. The survey results have been posted every week on the treasurer clerk's site on calgov.com. There's a section for charter review, and that's where you can find that. But I agree with you that it's not publicized well enough. Everybody should know where to find it, so I would hope that could be improved in the future. One other thing, I know we're talking about number of electors right now, but Mr. Sims makes a good point about the way meetings are conducted, and that is certainly an important point in determining the number of electors. How do these meetings happen? There was a point, I can't remember exactly when it was, a year ago, something like that, where there was an actual agenda item on the city commission on whether or not to formally go by Robert's Rules of Order in city commission meetings. As I remember, the city attorney, the former city attorney, advised against it because she felt that there would need to be a new position created as a parliamentarian, because she felt that she couldn't conduct parliamentarian duties while being the city attorney. That is, the county commission runs on Robert's Rules of Order, and the city attorney operates as parliamentarian. Blueprint does the same thing, as I understand it. So I just have a question here for Ms. Tolman. If there was another decision to go to Robert's Rules of Order, do you feel that you or somebody on your staff could conduct such meetings properly, according to Robert's Rules?
I don't really feel comfortable answering that, Mr. Payne. I mean, I think it would require research and consideration of the current situation. Robert's Rules of Order is, a very formal application of Robert's Rules of Order is not only very complicated, it's also very rarely used in practice. There's usually a modified version. There's a version of Robert's Rules that's intended for small boards. There's a lot of things that would go into that, and so I just don't feel comfortable answering that question
Okay,
in this context.
I accept that. I know it's out of order as far as what we're supposed to be discussing right now, but I thought it was a good point that was made by Mr. Sims.
So speaking of what we're talking about now, so just so the public is aware, and just to reiterate, I mean, this particular function or charge is just on the number of city commissioners. So the concept of single-member districts, which is related but not exactly the same thing, is not part of what we were specifically charged with. I think if members of this committee want to, as we've talked about, when we're through with these charges, somebody wants to say, well, this is, I'd like to bring this up, then that would be appropriate at that time. But for now, this is just on, is it 5 or is it something else, number of commissioners? Mr. Demerol?
I just want to kind of talk about what I tried to, I guess, touch on in the last meeting, that I really don't have strong opinion about this particular function number 1. And I think that, I've seen arguments on both sides of this function, but I do want it for the record. I want record to reflect that there are numerous local organizations who are against increasing from 5 to 7, and particularly local parties, and particularly local Democratic Party, and I have not heard from other organizations such as NAACP and others about this particular function. I think, for the record, whether, again, how I'm going to vote on this, I'm really not sure yet, but I just want the record to reflect that this function was highly politicized, and it is not good for this community in the long run. And I think this community 10 years from today, or 8 years from today, is going to have less representation, because this function today in 2024 was highly politicized, and it turned into some sort of local election campaign. I think 10 years from now, when I will be raising my kids in this town, and when minorities and other communities, when they have lesser representation, I think I want record to reflect that it is today's local politics that cause this function to be dysfunctional, and prevent it to have an honest conversation about truly communities, and potential conversations about the districts. And again, I'm with most of you. I think going from 5 to 7 with no discussion about district, it just doesn't make sense. For other purposes, I think staying 5, if it is working, I agree with some of you guys. If it's working, then let's just keep it as is. It's working for so many others out there, but again, I'm a little bit disappointed, particularly with this function, and I will really hope that we would have an honest conversation. But I just, again, I want record to reflect that this conversation has not been honest. I don't think we thoroughly look into the representation and how we could tackle this topic, and going from 5 to 7 could potentially bring new ideas, could potentially bring new opinions to the city commission, could potentially solve this so-called 3-2 gridlock, but we are not exploring it because some folks think they cannot raise money, right? It just comes down to that. Let's just be honest. We just talked about the voter turnout in the other topic. We said, well, turnout voters, well, go raise money, right? And a lot of folks are thinking, playing small petty politics, thinking that this particular function is not good for them because it's gonna be costly for them in the local election. And this, let's just have an honest conversation. I think that point in the short-term political interest of certain groups locally is going to hurt this community in about 10 years, when we have a shift in demographics. And this particular shift, when that happens, I want community to know that today we were not able to have an honest conversation, and we were not able to predict 10 years from today. So I'm just gonna leave it there.
Dr. Kessler?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of things, just understanding that we're really dealing with number 5 or 7 or whatever. But this map that was referred to, I think it was produced by you, sir, or was it produced by?
Well, I think it's produced by the supervisor of elections.
Supervisor, was that supposed to have color-coded on this side over here to identify these different areas of the map?
I can speak to that if you'd like me to.
Yeah.
So we were asked to put together some demographics on the map, a pretty quick turnaround. And so we had to do some things so this map in its digital form works on the internet. And there's a button up here that can show you the layers, like a legend. This is the data table that's behind the precinct when you touch it. So when you touch a precinct here and here, it shows you the tables here and here. That's how this map works, like that. So that's how it works now. The box on the top is the legend. Right now it's themed on overall turnout. And so it's just a dark to light color representation. And it's not to say there can't be adjustments made to what's in the table or what's in the colors, but with the turnaround time that we had, it was tight. And some of the layers were not made for public consumption, but when we approached this project, we kind of had the target of public consumption. We realized there's probably going to be a point where you're going to want people to see this. So that we're well positioned to do that, and we can make adjustments if needed to that, but it's better in a digital format than on paper.
Can I just ask you a question? So just to clarify though, what we have here color coded, it's essentially a heat map of the
Correct.
county. And so while this was put together quickly, there's nothing about this heat map that's inaccurate as far as total turnout in the county.
It would look this way no matter which election you picked, based on some of the data you've seen in the other handouts. I think it would look very much like this in other elections too.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Kessler?
And then there was a comment made about nonpartisan races. Partisan politics keeps on coming up somehow. And then there was a comment made about cost, and the only thing stopping moving to 7 would be the cost of, what I heard or received was like political parties or whatever the drivers were to get out their votes being more expensive. But I look at cost in a different way, and I look at it as the cost of government expense. And taxpayers this year, or whenever it was, just recently, went through a pretty significant tax increase. And so I'm looking at costs from the perspective of the citizen, many of which are struggling in today's economy. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Thank you. Other discussion on this item? Mr. Willis?
I just want to add, just to clarify, I'm cognizant of what the cost might look like if we were to make changes, but to me, I think the highest and best use of government is properly representing and taking care of its citizens and providing services. So if we're looking at the various costs throughout the budget, if we were to decide, and this is a big if we were to decide that the number of electors needed to increase, I can't think of a better cost as long as that was tied to better representation of the citizens, so.
Other discussion on the committee? Okay, anybody else from the public want to speak on this item?
They have online.
Yeah, anybody online want to speak on this item? All right,
I have a
yeah,
question.
Ms.
Is
James?
the expectation that the recommendation isn't either an up-down recommendation, meaning increase or not, or are we able to give any direction in terms of, for example, the county is hybrid. They have 7, but in terms of how it actually impacts the electorate, it's a hybrid. So there's a lot of discussion about representation and dilution of representation. So my question is, are we only giving an affirmative or negative recommendation? Is that the expectation?
What I would suggest is, again, the charge is should it be changed, and should the number be changed? So I would suggest that we address that head-on, should it or should it not? And if it should, what should it be changed to? But if you have a concern about, wanting to, dig into the, representation part and districts and that sort of thing, that should come as one of the things that we recommend to the commission, where you didn't ask us this specifically, but we think you ought to think about this.
There was a hand on the.
Okay.
He has to unmute himself.
Okay, who was it, I'm sorry?
It's Matt.
Okay, we had somebody that wanted to speak online, but they have to unmute themselves. Not seeing anybody at this point.
Sorry, I didn't realize.
Okay. Go ahead. Please give us your name for the record if you would, too.
And I just wanted to kind of quickly offer a comment and a thought about the expanded number of members, and also, because it's kind of been brought up a bit, at least the districting issue. I know right now it's mostly about expanding members. I just want to kind of make a point, though, about the issues around minority representation. I do think that, while I don't think expanding the commission, saying moving from 5 to 7, if they're all at large, would really harm or hurt or anything, that moving to districts actually could hurt minority representation, because right now, the city of Tallahassee has shown that it will elect people regardless of race. We see African American candidates win, we see white candidates win, and so on. But there is racial polarization within the city, especially in some of the more heavily white suburban areas. And there's no way you'll be able to draw districts that don't essentially guarantee African Americans could never make up a majority of the city council. That can happen with at-large right now. The reason the county commission is districted is for this exact reason. When they were initially sued by the NAACP in the 1980s, there was never an instance of an African American winning countywide. They had tried and kept losing. So the county was forced to district itself in order to guarantee some minority representation. The reason the city was not mandated into that same thing by the NAACP and federal lawsuits was because we've been electing African Americans citywide since the 1970s. So if you go into a position where you start dividing the city up, you're going to end up with maybe 1 or 2 districts that's heavily African American, and the others are going to be 70 to 80% white. And based on the data that we have seen, even in recent years, it would be very hard for an African American to win in some of those heavily white districts. So if the concern is minority representation, I think that's worth keeping.
Your comment? Yeah, could you give us your name again, please, the person who just spoke?
Yeah, this is Matthew Isbell.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dimmer?
I'll agree with Matt, and I understand that he has access to a lot of public data that we do, but my comment previously actually goes along with what Matt just said. If we have an influx of, and just briefly discussing this, if 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as Florida is growing and taking a major immigration, numbers are going thousands in other cities, and within 3-4 years, demographics change very rapidly. What Matt just described could be potentially a disadvantage against the minority communities, and the only reason why NAACP sued back in the days was they were in disadvantage back then. Now, he's correct on a point where today they're not. But again, 10 years from now, if demographics change, and the city commission right now, I think I agree with Jared that it has the accurate representation, and I agree that we are doing great now. But I think he just made my point that it's a bit of a short-sighted discussion that we are having. We're trying to protect what it is today, but we are not really planning for the future, and there are no safeguards in place to make sure that certain districts and certain demographics are safeguarded from being completely eliminated from representation. 50, I don't know, 50,000, well, let's just say 10,000 families, white families move to Leon County in the next 4-5 years. City Commission is going to be drastically changed, right? I mean, based on what we just discussed and what Matt discussed, and the only safeguard there will be the district. Now, I'm not making a position for district. I'm not advocating for the district. I just want to say earlier that the conversation got so diluted. There's absolutely nothing wrong with going from 5 to 7 and having more folks on city commission. Now, I do have a little bit of an institutional memory, which is the terminology I got from Jim in the last meeting, institutional memory, right? Now, I do have a little bit of an institutional memory where in 2018, we did not have this gridlock, right? In fact, certain commissioners, particularly 1 or 2 commissioners that are on the opposing side today, they were voting together back in 2018. And 2019, the same way. Some things went wrong along the way. Now we ended up with 3-2. Now, there are folks out there saying, let's not bring more opinions on the table. Let's just not go from 5 to 7. And I did hear some fiscally conservative positions earlier where let's just watch out for the spending, additional commissioner and additional aid. But I think that there will be a day where we'll get back to normal politics in this town, and hopefully it's going to be pretty soon. And when we get back to normal politics, I'm hoping that this 3-2 disappears eventually. But at that point, it will be good to have more opinion conversation, because 5, let's just keep it as is, and let's just continue with the way things are, as it's working as is. So that's my comment.
Mr. Willis?
I wanted to continue. I thought Matt's assessment was good, actually, but I thought the key words So, yeah, right now, that's always been, I mean, again, right now, we do have accurate representation. But go back and look at the map, and I would even go farther and say that that demographic is already changed. If you were to take this map and draw a little line around where the USA is, and then draw a little line around where the city limits are, I could point to 4 to 5 high turnout, primarily white, affluent precincts that are in the USA, but they're not in the city limits. And at a certain point, I think it would make sense, right? If you're receiving city services, why would you not vote in city elections? And so the demographics have already changed, and at a certain point, our elections could change overnight were that annexation to take place. And look, that's a hypothetical situation, but what I'm saying is that the demographics are already putting these communities in jeopardy. And so I want to reiterate, you know, I understand that so far it's been working as far as the representation. I am looking at what is this going to look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and I don't care about the Leon Dems. I don't care about the Leon Republicans. I don't care about parties in this situation because we are talking about nonpartisan races. They do not matter. And so that's what I'm looking at, and I will reiterate for the 20th time, I know y'all are sick of me hearing this, or sick of me saying this, but I think we're missing the boat by only talking about the number. And to Ms. James' point, I think when we've looked at the other items on this, on our scope, for example, the salaries, the timing of whether something's on the commission, we've looked at the section in question in total. And so when I look at section 9, the only thing in there is the number of electors. But if we're going to change section 9, it's a single paragraph. So I don't know, I'm looking at this section now, and I think if that were something that you were open to talking about, I think it might make sense. I do think if we were to talk about districts at large versus single member, I think there should be some component, because there is I mean, the Leon County Commission is a great example of, you have representation in districts, and then you have at-large representation where you have the whole city that's a part of that. And so I think it strikes a really good balance. I just want to go on the record as saying that, and you know, I'm looking forward to further discussion.
Okay. Other discussion on this item, function number 1? Going once, twice? Okay, should we move to function number 2? Any additional information any member of the committee wants from the staff about function number 2? Yes, Mr. Willis.
So, I had a brief conversation with staff around this already, and I just want to put this out there so that it's in the public. I think it might be helpful, some of what we've been talking about is part-time versus full-time. I've already said on the record, I'm not really worried about how we classify that, because I don't think there's anyone, you know, checking to see what that looks like. But I do think it'd be helpful to quantify the amount of time and effort that our commission puts in. And so I know there are some items that we can get a hold of fairly easily without having to go through redactions. And so I just have a list here of things that I think might, in total, I don't think any single one of them is indicative of on its own what the commitment is. But I think as a holistic view, the following items would be helpful for me in understanding the commitment that our commissioners make. So the first item is, I know that there is a system to swipe in and swipe out of City Hall. I think it'd be helpful to have, and again, I know this isn't exhaustive, there's a lot of work to be done out in the community, but I think it'd be helpful to kind of know, all right, how much office time are we talking about here? As far as calendars go, I know that you get to a point where you have to start redacting things, but I think it'd be interesting to quantify the number of calendar entries and maybe the total volume of time that's spent on official business. And then the final thing, and I think this is probably the most indicative, is just the volume of email. Again, we don't want individual emails, but the volume of email flowing in and out of each office. And so I think those 3 items would be helpful. I'm sure there's other things that we could add to that. And I think it would also be helpful as we're talking about the time that the commission is putting in. I think it'd be helpful to, I think Mr. Sims had a great example, talking through the staff support. And so I'd like that to also include the office as a whole versus just the single individuals, because I think that's part of the overall commitment, so.
Any objection to those? Are you guys comfortable with being able to gather those things? I don't know about the swipes, but you guys can check that out, I guess.
We'll find out what we can pull together.
Okay.
Most of that would come from the, IT folks would be the ones that gather that. Tuesday's not very far away, but we'll maybe bring back a report on that one, because I think this was an item you indicated might be a subsequent decision
Well,
anyway. so
yeah, it
might
may
have some time.
stretch past next week, but Dr. Kessler?
Yeah, that was my concern also, that we're dealing with a really short window here. If staff thinks they can do it without breaking legs, it's fine. But, in reality, commissioners are not locked into their, offices. A lot of commissioners are out there going to places, meeting people, meeting organizations. So I don't think that's really going to be reflective of whether a person is productive or not.
So let's, Mr. Payne and then Mr. Willis.
I just had one other thing when you're talking about gathering data for us. I would like more information on the aid structure. And that might be pretty easy for you to gather. How many aides are allowed per commissioner? I have a feeling that it's 1 per commissioner. I think the mayor has 2, but I may be guessing there. I don't know. So I'd like some information on that. Those are full-time positions, I believe. When we're talking about how much time a commissioner spends on their duties, a lot of it's just time management and personnel management, assigning the timely, time-sensitive work to aides so that commissioners can do what they do, what politicians do. If we're concerned about the time that's being spent, we need, like you said, consider the aides in there. I heard at one point that the mayor's office controls the personnel functions of all the aides. I may be totally wrong about that, but one of the commissioners told me about that. So I like some idea of what the actual structure is. Might help us.
Beg your pardon?
Want some comment now or no?
Why don't you, let's just bring that back,
Okay.
maybe in written form if we can, and
Okay.
Mr. Wilson and then Ms. James.
Well,
then
and I
Dr.
can clarify if it's helpful. So part of why I worded it the way I did is to avoid anything that would require too much staff time. I don't want anything that's going to require redactions. That's why I'm just looking for top-level statistics. I don't want every swipe in and swipe out. A quantification of hours is fine. A quantification of volume on the calendar, email volume. I think those things should be, if it's not something we can get, it's not something we can get. But I know these items are public record. And then, to Mr. Kessler and Mr. Payne's point, I agree, there's time that's spent outside of the office, but, if you're on public business, I would assume, it's public record that you're doing it, so it should be on your public calendar. So and that's why I asked for these things as a whole, because I agree, I don't think any one particular item is indicative of the time put in, but I think as a holistic overview, and again, I think the email volume is probably the thing that's going to be the most compelling, but I just think physical time, we talked about the difference between part-time and full-time. I'd like to see what that looks like, so.
Ms. James.
I want to go back to actually one of the requests by Mr. Sims, and I'd like to see what the total compensation is for each commissioner over a time period. So maybe going back 5 years. I know it's usually something that folks at work see. You can see what your total compensation is, your salary, your 401K or deferred comp. You can see all of that. And so I think it would be helpful for us to see what the average or total compensation is for the commissioners.
Dr. Struble and Mr. Demerol.
That spoke to my concern as well, and I'm wondering, is it possible to get some kind of, I guess I'm looking at how much does it cost for us to have, what's the cost associated per commissioner? And it would speak to kind of this item and the previous item, just to tell us, is it, what are we shelling out as a city to house, employ, and all the components that go along with having a commissioner?
Okay, are these,
Yeah, so I think some of these are fairly straightforward. So we've given you, and I think City Attorney had one in hand, but a benefit sheet at a previous meeting that identified all the benefits that are there. I'll look, or maybe some of those that provide you a description but not a quantification. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, that doesn't help me.
Okay.
Because there is a number, I mean, when you get
Yeah.
health benefits, you can have
Gotcha.
a quantifiable number.
I got you. Okay.
So.
Yep,
Yeah.
so that's
So
what
this
I
is
say,
helpful,
some
but
things are
this
fairly
isn't-
straightforward, so
it's different than what
some
I'm
of those
asking.
things will be real easy to say. There's a number associated with this, here's what it is. Overall cost, we'll probably be able to provide you some general budget information. I think, as I was thinking about it before this meeting, I'm not sure. It's an unusual situation where maybe the budget is more important to you than the actual expenditures, because if I spent $5, that's interesting, but if I could have spent $5 million, then that's what you want to know.
Exactly. The potential.
all right, I'm sorry, Mr. Demerol, did you have something else
Yeah,
on that?
did we talk about the expense accounts? Last time, I think someone brought it up, right? You brought it up to see how much money is assigned to each commissioner, or is there a cap? Did we talk about that already? Did we?
We did not hear. I've got some general information there that I would have brought, but given the variety of discussion, I think, as the chair said, we'll get all of that information, expenses in the budget, specifics for the benefit sheet that was provided, and I think maybe put it all in one place, because I think I could answer several of those individually right now, but you still wouldn't have one thing in front of you. You say, I remember 3 of the numbers, but not the 4th one. So we'll get that to you for the meeting.
Okay. Any other discussion on this item?
I just want to make a quick comment on this.
Sure. Go ahead.
Is it 8 o'clock yet?
No.
Almost there.
You're good.
I think commission compensation is, I think, a little bit more about expectation from our commissioners. I think my conversation with a lot of local folks surrounding this topic is that, and I remember last time we talked about the public service, and I do recall your comment, Dr. Kessler and Mr. Chairman. It's a public service, but at the same time, I wanted to bring up this conversation, and I did ask staff to look at other constitutional offices and other folks that are in public service, and how much they're being compensated for their time in the public service. So I believe it's a little bit about what we expect from our city commissioners personally, and based on my conversation. Yeah, well, let's just look at that real quickly and see the 11. Many of you received this. I don't know if you have time to. If you go down to page 11, down a little bit more. A little bit more, a little bit more. A little bit more. Yep, right here. Leon County, and I think I did take notes here. We have Leon County Clerk of Court, Property Appraisal, Supervisor of Electors, and the Tax Collector is being compensated in close to $170,000 a year. Sheriff is being compensated $207,000 a year. County commissioners are 96, as we discussed. Public schools, superintendent $170,000 a year, and the school board is somewhere around the city commissioner side, which is $46,000 a year. Now we do have all these electives that are being compensated, and again, most of them are considered full-time jobs, and they are providing services to our community, vital services to our community. Now, I guess the conversation here is, do we consider a city commissioner as the role of a city commissioner as vital as the other public officials, right? I think city commissioners do make decisions on very important topics such as your taxes, your utilities, and other important topics when it comes to zoning, public safety, funding your police department, whether it is variety of other topics that have an impact on your living standards. I think these require, I think this is getting a little bit beyond just showing up part-time and just taking your vote. This job requires you to attend meetings, conferences. This job requires you to go talk to your police chief or your sheriff or your local zoning folks and understand the issues. I think it's a little bit more of, at least that's what I expect, right? I want to make sure that we are looking at what we expect from a city commissioner to do, and for that time, not necessarily considering that as a job, but for that time, how much they should be compensated. I'm just going to say that I believe existing compensation is way below for what they do to help themselves make solid decisions for this community. I think they should be compensated more. How much more? I have no idea. Should that be equal to county commissioners? I have no idea. What should be the formula? Again, I have no idea. But I think my expectation is a little bit higher. I would love to see discussion going further on potentially inserting some sort of language, at least allowing city commissioners, well, not allowing, but maybe inserting this language into the charter that they could be compensated a little bit more time, more for the time they spend on all these issues.
Okay.
So,
Other discussion on this item in function 2? Mr. Payne?
I just want to point out, when you're comparing salaries to constitutional officers like sheriff, supervisor of elections, and all those kinds of jobs, all of those that you listed, other than the county commission or the city commission, are executive positions. They're not legislative. In the same way that if you look at federal government, the president is an executive position. The congressmen are legislative. The congressmen are also paid a lot less than the executive positions. In a council manager form of government, such as we have in the city and the county, the executive positions, the administrative positions are obviously full-time jobs, and they are well compensated. I'm not saying I'm against pay raises or anything, because it's rather low, but I think it's a little bit problematic to make direct comparisons with executive level positions.
All right, any other discussion among the committee at this point? If not, any members of the public want to speak on this item? Mr. Sims?
Mr. Munson, I'm out there at 1320 Avondale Way, and I'm gonna say this because I like being me, and sometimes being me, y'all might think I'm being rude, but it's just my culture. I'm a black man out there with a lot of white people in Avondale. We have different political views, but we respect each other. And when you were talking, I was thinking about my conservative neighbor up the street who's watching me, and he said to me this word, Mr. Kessler, when you all were debating about full-time, part-time. And he told me is, we don't set a salary for an elected position of a public servant based upon the workforce schedule. Because the number one premise of you wanting to be a public official is not for you to do it and to take care of your family, but because you see a need in the community. And he explained it like me, and Mr., he's a Republican and we get along, we don't go to the poll together, but if I have a flat tire, he'll give me some air. And he explained it to me like this here. He said, Mr. Sims, if you were sick and your heart was hanging out your chest, I want to help you, but I don't have the tools to help you. So I can only give you what I got. But if I don't have the capacity to give you more, that's not a bad thing. And I guess what he was saying to me is, even though anybody in America can run for office, we'll never have it where everybody's going to have an equal playing field. There's always going to be challenges. And so I'm just asking this board not to set this salary based upon what they pay a manager at Burger King or management or a consultant area, because there's so many variables. I'm going to determine if I want my tax dollars checking to see whether a man is being wrong about cutting down a tree. If I feel that my tax dollars are not being spent, then I ain't gonna vote for that joker again. I think that you guys, in a nice way, I love your dialogue. But this is an elected position. Now, 49 is too low, based upon the workload. The Bible said much is given, much is required. But I ain't looking at no $80,000, $90,000 salary.
Any other members of the public like to speak on this item? Mr. Martin.
Yes, I'm just going to reiterate what I said last week in part. Going back to 2 weeks ago, the chairman bringing up public service, yes, that ought to be what drives people to seek political office, to represent the public, not monetary payback. The value that somebody has in being able to make decisions that the rest of us have to live within our backyard ought to be a prime motivating factor. As I said last time, I would pay to be in the position of commissioners to make decisions that they make. So ideally, they ought to be motivated by something beyond the almighty dollar. And going back to a number of at-large versus represented districts, when people make decisions that affect the lives of those beyond their district, those whose lives are affected ought to have some right to determine who's going to make those votes. So I believe that they should be continued to be at-large districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public like to speak on this item? All right. Any members of the committee, anything else on this? Mr. General.
One more thing.
There are real quality nonprofit organizations out there. And folks that are running those nonprofit organizations do get compensated properly to run an operation of that kind, right? And they do have a cause. Most of those are noble causes. But like you said, Mr. Payne, those are executive positions, and I do understand that, and that's the reason why initially I wanted to talk about expectations. What do we expect from our city commissioners? Do we expect city commissioners to go out, investigate, talk, reach out to citizens, show up, figure out what the cause is, what the problem is, bring back an agenda item, or ask staff to follow up? Do we want city commissioners to take an active role in our community and participate in our community? Or do we want city commissioners to just simply read the agenda items and make that decision within a week or so, right? I mean, I'm just saying in general terms. Of course, we do have city commissioners that are doing more, and we do have city commissioners that are doing less. I was able to pull an article from the county commissioners doing their charter review, and in that article, they were saying the same thing. Some of the county commissioners were doing this as a full-time job. Particularly, one county commissioner was indicating that she quit her job so that she would devote her time to Leon County and do this as a full-time. And the other commissioners were saying, well, you know, we could do it all. We could be a father, we could be a commissioner, we could be a consultant at the same time. So I think it's really about setting an expectation. I personally have an expectation from our commissioners to go out there, investigate, participate, get feedback, engage with the community, and spend a lot of time with the community to understand where the problems are. And I think that takes time. And I think the current compensation, if they're gonna give up their daytime job, or if they're going to reduce the amount of time they spend on their daytime job to spend more time with the community, I think it's just about being fair to these folks that are devoting their time. It's not about making anybody rich, or it's not about the numbers. I feel like existing number, and again, this is for all the sitting commissioners right now, and I think all of them deserve a little bit more compensated. It's not particularly one or two. And I do know that some of these folks that are sitting on city commission right now, they do have other jobs, some don't. And particularly, I think, as one of the speakers earlier, the first or the second meeting mentioned that Commissioner Porter devotes her entire time to this community. Beautiful. I think she should be compensated a little bit more than what she's being compensated. Same way, I think, again, it's about expectations. As my conversation with a lot of folks, they do expect their commissioners to know the issues, understand the issues, engage with the community, be within the community, and I think that takes time. And I truly think 46, 47, whatever that number is right now, it's not even at our living standards. I think that should be increased, just simply because we should be fair to our policymakers.
Okay, any other discussion on this item? Ms. James?
I would just add, one thing that hasn't come up a lot, Brewer kind of touched on it, is just, for me, I have an expectation that the commissioner will be well prepared and prepped, and that having served on, again, not on a commission, but on governing boards where the information is complex and dense, you can probably tell I read and review and ask a lot of questions. I would expect that of my commissioners. That's something that can't be quantified by card swipes or meetings. And so I just add that to the conversation in terms of the amount of time that commissioners take, because that's my expectation. And so when people bring up things like utilities and, you know, land use and environmental issues, these are not things that lay people typically know and understand. It takes a lot of time to understand that. And so, again, I just speak from that being my expectation, and that is something that I would hope commissioners are spending a lot of time ensuring that they are making well-informed decisions before they decide. And again, just on the same token, that another expectation related to that is that would lead to less reliance on staff. If you have a commissioner that's well-informed, well-prepped, then it'll help reduce instances where you take a staff recommendation because you have no idea what's being discussed. So for me, that's a part of the equation.
Dr. Strube?
Yeah, listening to this conversation, and I get the sense that many of us are open to the consideration of an increase in the compensation. For me, the problem still lies in, I don't know how we determine, you know, a fair process to decide what that number should be. And that's where I'm stuck at, and I'm hoping there's some kind of assistance that could be offered. I looked at all, it looks like if we were to compare them to every other city where they have commissions, they're not at the bottom, they're not at the top, but they're not that far below. So I guess we're kind of in a situation where everyone seems to be underpaying their city commission. So then how do we justify to our public, if we were going to recommend that we're going to move them from, I think they're like 46,000 something to something higher than that? How do we justify? What is it going to be based on? And that's kind of where I'm in that decision process. We need some guidance on that.
So if we could, maybe let's stop here for a second and just talk about procedurally sort of how we're going forward. We talked about this some at the beginning of the meeting, and I wanted to kind of go over, sort of where I think we are in terms of voting and when, and then also talk about, I know that a number of the members of the committee have, additional items they'd like to bring up. So I'd like to talk about how we do that, when we do that, how that process would work. So if we could, let's just chat about that. And Ms. Dorsey, missed the early part of the discussion, so let me kind of go over where I think we are. Please feel free to correct me if let me just do this first if I could. So, all right, so I think that, the next meeting, which is Tuesday of next week at the Renaissance Center, I think we're going to have a full contingent of everybody being there. So we had talked about, being in a position maybe to vote on certain of the items there. My sense, based on the discussion tonight, is that functions 3 and 4, we should be in a position to vote for next week. Function 1, maybe less, and function 2, probably not less. So I, and so we have the meeting next Tuesday, and then we have a meeting the following Thursday. And then I will, that'll be the last meetings I'm at, unless this goes past March 17th, which if it does, it'll be a long run. But anyway, that is not necessarily here than there. Commissioner Bryant can run with the ball from there. But I think it would be good, given that we have the whole crew here next Tuesday, that to talk about if there are things that people want to bring up in addition to what we're talking about, that maybe we at least have a discussion, what are those and when are they going to be brought up in what order? So I would just throw out there to you guys that maybe one way to do this is if somebody has a proposal, I would like to talk about this, at least talk about it, presenting this to the city as an additional item, that we maybe consider that, have a vote on, do we want to spend time with this, and if, 8 of us don't, then there's no sense spending time with that. And sort of go down the line. I mean, I've heard discussion about single-member districts. I think some people would like to talk about that. I know there was ethics committee discussion early on. People would like to talk about that. And then maybe whatever gets the most support for, moving forward, we do first. Because I can see that they're potentially, well, sorry, we never got to that, so we're running out of time here. I mean, does that seem like a fair way to do this?
I think so.
Okay. And maybe while we have the full group here next Tuesday, we save some time at the end of the meeting to sort of do that and decide, okay, once we get past function 2 here, then we're going to move to this. I mean, one other thing to sort of think about in that, and it's sort of staff time, well, I want to talk about this, but we're going to need all this, stuff, I mean, I think until we vote on it, that we're going to do it, then the staff's really not directed to spend any time with it, if that makes sense as well. Mr. Payne.
Along those lines, it's probably no surprise, I do have a couple of additional topics I'd like to address. I'm not ready to introduce those now, but they will involve asking for documents to be produced to the committee that will advocate for these positions. Should I ask for those documents now so that they're ready to go next week when we're begin to discuss that? Or
I think what I'd rather, your decision, is let's have a discussion about whether people even want to consider it. And then if they do, the beauty of starting next week is maybe there's some time for the staff to actually get it together so that it can be ready when we're ready to discuss it. If that.
What I have in mind won't take long to gather. It's just
Okay.
two documents.
Okay.
However you want to do it.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that discussion? And so I want to get back to sort of getting to votes on function 1 and function 2 also, sort of when and when we, so, you know, when we think we can do that. I mean, my sense, you know, and sort of with the limited scope of function 1 that we talked about, that maybe we can get to at least a vote on that sooner than later. I mean, it'd be nice to do it next week, and then we're sort of down to, I mean, next Tuesday, then we're sort of down to the, you know, function 2 and whatever else we want to talk about. But again, I don't want to, this is all of our committees, I don't want to shortchange anybody that feels like they want to talk. You want to hear more from the public, you know, that's all wide open. Mr. Willis.
So I want to be clear about what you're proposing. You're saying that we need to allot time next week while everyone's here to kind of make a determination around if and what we want to move forward on outside of the scope, if we want to do something outside of the scope?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, I don't see it as being locked in that, hey, you didn't bring it up Tuesday, or you couldn't make the meeting, then you're foreclosed. But I just think it's, if we want to do that, and it sounds like people do, we need to have a little bit of a process of when and how. So that was sort of my thinking on it.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. I was just gonna say, I would prefer it obviously be next week, because, you know, we have folks kind of coming in and out at this
Right.
meeting, and I think it's probably best for the whole group to kind of be around for that, but.
Okay, no, I thought the same thing, so, okay. And Mr. Payne.
And just to be clear, what I have in mind, I would like the committee to have a week or so to examine these documents and read them before we begin discussion. So I'm just trying to fit it in at the most logical place so that there is time for the documents to be produced, and then there's time for the committee to see them, and the public.
Okay, well, again, so back to our discussion, so, you know, so if we could get through 4, 3, and 1 on Tuesday, and then we're left with function 2, and maybe we try and wrap ourselves up with that by the subsequent meeting, that would give time, at least one meeting, maybe 2, for discussion about other topics. And so back to the question of, you know, because it's so, my sense is function 2 is so all over the place, as Dr. Struble said, you know, we could have the staff, you know, give us some options of you know, here's, you know, you don't have to do this, but here's maybe 3 or 4 ways to go at this if you want to. Is that a useful thing that you'd like to do?
Can I
Mr. Willis.
propose maybe we do it a little bit in reverse? I mean, I think we all agree 4 and 3, we're basically there. I think we need to spend some concerted time on 2. And so, you know, I know we kind of hit that at the tail end of this meeting. I kind of think maybe next week it might make sense to knock 4 and 3 out and really spend some time digging into 2 so we can make some progress. Because you know, like I said, I think we all agree we're the farthest apart on that item. And I think that'll give us a better idea of what our timing looks like going forward. If we don't make progress on 2, it's just as likely that we could be looking at that and saying, okay, well, we're not going to have time to do anything else.
I agree.
So,
Ms. James?
In looking at the function, I would even suggest, maybe not next week, but at some point, taking a vote on whether or not we're up or down on number 2. I mean, a lot of the conversation trails off
Right.
into the how much, but we don't know yet whether or not what the vote is on who thinks that there should be an increase or not. And
Okay.
so if we at least get on the record as saying yes or no to that, if we say no, then all the rest of it is irrelevant. If we say yes, then it requires further exploration.
Okay. I mean, I think that's not a bad idea. Any objection to doing, you know, trying to do that at Tuesday's meeting? Okay.
The only
Yes.
question is, can we do that? I mean, I guess that's for,
Well, yeah,
For you, Mr.
we're not making a recommendation. We're just deciding if we want to, you know, to go forward yet.
no, I mean, can we take an official vote on an item that is not agenda related? I guess you know, so it's a technical question. Maybe we can just override it. I guess we may be fine. But the question is whether we want to even touch this or not, right? Did I get that right?
No, so the function, maybe you did, but the function reads from the bylaws, review the compensation to be paid to the mayor. And so what I'm saying is, we've done that. We've And so we will be stating, based upon our review, we believe that it should either stay the same or increase.
Oh, sure.
And
Okay.
that
Right.
be the,
And if it's increased, then there's more discussion
there's more
going
discussion,
forward.
but
If
if
there's
the
not,
group-
then we've decided
right,
function
then
two.
there's nothing else
Yeah.
to really
Okay,
to
that makes
explore.
sense.
Okay, Ms. Dorsey.
Could we also be served by maybe coming up with a series of potential processes for determining it, and that way we might know which one we want to go with?
Well, that's
such as
sort of
like-
what I was suggesting, that the staff might give us, come up with
like
3 or
based on
4
median
different,
income,
yeah,
based
you
on
can
the
go with what the county
county commissioner
said,
still,
you
but
can do this.
70%, like
I mean, there's
looking
a
at some
whole
different-
myriad of ways, but at least this would be some framework of, you might think of
And then,
these.
and then if that happens with the staff, could we get like the numbers and what the potential,
What the dollar
what the,
work
yeah,
out
what the
is.
dollar amount
I
would be?
like
Like if we go with 70% of the county commissioners, it would be this. If we go with, based on median income, it would be like this, that kind of potential
Okay.
thing.
Do that in 2 days.
So,
Yeah, look
So-
at math.
on point, when is the next time after that meeting where we'll be all together
The
again?
29th.
Well, the 29th, I don't know that we'll all be here for that, but that was the next meeting, it's Thursday, the 29th,
So March,
February 29th.
February 29th is when we have a lot of folks,
No, we're gonna have
Yeah.
less. The only time we're gonna have everybody here is the 20th,
20th, which is the next
the
meeting.
next meeting.
Next week,
Yeah.
like I said.
And
And
then-
after that, we don't have the full 10-member,
Correct.
Correct.
okay. Do we have a date where we'll have at least 8 or 9, the maximum amount of folks that will be
Yeah.
here?
I think they're gonna be like 8 on both of those days.
So our information indicated all 10 on Tuesday, the 20th, 8 would be available and present on Thursday, the 29th, and then Thursday, March the 7th is 1, 2, 3, 7 yes, 1 maybe, and 3 no, but we did not go past March 7th or look at alternatives for that. I think we did discuss that Tuesday, March 5th, Tuesday wasn't any better than Thursday.
So if we are going to knock out 3 and 4 this upcoming Tuesday,
Tuesday.
sorry, and we'll take that vote to see if we want to touch the next one. And potentially at that point, we can ask the staff to bring, what if we did this and that kind of, if you tie it to county, if you, what you just
All the
said.
different potential processes.
And we'll take that vote on the one after the 29th. Right, so the next vote will be knocking out the compensation function 2 on the 29th. Then we'll just have function 1, maybe? We can set a time to knock out function 1, 2, maybe on 29th.
Dr. Kessler?
So what was the reason for not addressing function 1 at the next meeting?
We're ready to.
Well, yeah, I was sort of thinking the same thing. I mean, I think we're at the point where we either want to change it from 5 or leave it at 5, and so I wonder if we can't do that.
Yeah, let's get it.
And if people, if we want to change it, then maybe with some more discussion, and if not, then there's not. So I'm thinking maybe all 4, we could start to vote and then see where it goes from there. That makes sense to everybody?
It does.
Okay. All right, well, if there's nothing else, we will stand adjourned then.
10 minutes.
Good job.
House just finished their